One NFL analyst described the Browns' offseason as, quote, underrated. I tend to agree. We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. Sam Monson had an interesting take on the Browns offseason. I agree with him. Obo Okoronkwo released by the Browns and move that wasn't really all that unexpected. And if you want to see the Browns during training camp, there are limited opportunities to do so. First, though, I do want to thank you for being on every day here at the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed. Bonus content on some weekends as well, and it's totally free to you. Just hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you listen to your podcast, and of course at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. And Sam Monson had an interesting clip that was going around online yesterday. I found it to be pretty interesting in terms of how people in the NFL or people around the NFL are sort of viewing the Browns offseason and the moves that they decided to make. Sam Monson, obviously formerly of PFF, now of the 33rd team. And he basically described, the word he used to describe the Browns offseason was underrated. And he pointed to a couple of different things, which was first, the offseason started with this grand trade declaration or trade request from Myles Garrett. He said he wanted out. He was trying to force his way out. And that whole dilemma, that whole debacle ends with you retaining Myles Garrett. Yes, on an expensive deal, but such is life in the NFL. And then, cementing him to be part of this organization till the end of his career, theoretically, and fulfilling that destiny of Cleveland to Canton that Andrew Berry talked about. So that's a win. You kept your best player and one of the best players in football on your roster for the remainder of his prime and the rest of his career, and he got paid. And then he sort of pointed to the draft. And we know the biggest question with this team is the quarterback position, of course. And he mentioned, like, you got the quarterback in the 5th round, mind you, that I would have taken at number 2 if, as a team that needed a quarterback, he would have been the guy I would have taken. And so the Browns sort of rolled with how the NFL was evaluating Shedeur for reasons, probably obviously unfair reasons as well, in my opinion, as to why he wasn't taken on day 2 like many projected he should have been. He was unfairly graded, unfairly sort of, I think treated here in terms of how they viewed him in retrospect, based off of just the one, as far as we know, bad sort of interview that went on with the New York Giants, and I think that got used against him. But they were letting that kind of ride out to see how long they could wait to pull the trigger on somebody like that. And then they got him in the 5th round, which was immense value, where he now has a chance, given how talented he is, to be one of the biggest steals in NFL history if he pans out to be that franchise quarterback for them. Like, the value was immense, and they got him in the 5th round. And on top of that, they doubled up on the quarterback position, took another guy that they have confidence in, even though maybe some others didn't feel like he was a top 150 prospect in this year's class in general, in Dylan Gabriel. And they have a chance to sort of attack the position on multiple fronts and hopefully walk away with something from one of these two guys, whether it's the franchise quarterback, a long-term backup, whatever. They doubled up and you took more bites at the apple. And so that kind of led to his argument as to why he thinks this Browns offseason was underrated. He also talked about the Travis Hunter decision and how the Browns obviously opted not to take him and instead trade back and get Mason Graham at 5 and add the pick for next year, which he thought was another sort of savvy move to set yourself up to rebuild more quickly next year. And I tend to agree with that as well. So every step of the way, I do agree that this Browns offseason probably hasn't been talked about enough because, listen, they didn't have like the splashy move other than adding Shedeur Sanders. That was the one thing that like catches everybody's attention because he is this celebrity, unlike other celebrities in football. And there's not really a lot of guys like him that garner as much hype and celebrity and attention as he does. But other than that, like they could have taken Travis Hunter and that would have been a big story. They took Mason Graham. Taking a defensive tackle, unless it's like the next Aaron Donald or something, isn't going to be like a sexy pick for people. So I get that. But I still think you also attacked a number of areas of need with minimal resources to do so. I've talked about it. I think the Malik Collins signing is a majorly underrated signing, and that feeds once again into the idea that you had an underrated offseason in general between the draft and free agency. Adding 2 running backs to sort of form this new dynamic duo as you go back to Kevin Stefanski's offense, I thought was a good move by this team that should be applauded. You potentially replace Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah with Carson Schlesinger. That's a nice move right there. You add another tight end who maybe could be your tight end in the future, but allows you to do some different things because now you have 2 guys that you can kind of throw out there and use as weapons in this offense at that position. So there was a lot to like about, I think, this offseason in general. And I've talked about this a little bit before, but to hear somebody like Sam Monson on a national scale, guy who's one of I think a brilliant football and X's and O's evaluator and whatnot. When he studies these guys, I think he's spot on with this. And I sort of rehashed this conversation for me to not even just take it, because I know I talked about the draft being underrated. I think like their entire offseason process feels like it's going to be a little bit underrated here. If these guys hit and if they end up finding a number of guys that fit here and that have good seasons in 2025, in terms of trying to sort of try to stay competitive, given the spot that you're in, while also thinking about the future. I think Andrew Berry did balance that sort of well. And frankly, like this draft and this offseason could end up being like the best of Andrew Berry's time here in Cleveland if a lot of these different things work out. Now, there's flaws, there's questions with it. Taking Dillon Gabriel in the 3rd round, they felt strongly that he should be their pick there. They really loved him for the intangibles, the strong arm, all those things. There are questions there. I don't think in my evaluation process I would have had him in that area where I would have taken him at 94. There's plenty of others who wouldn't have either, but they felt strongly like he was the guy. And I've said, like, when you go back to the draft, if they had flipped where they took Sanders and Gabriel, I think people would have probably been like, they probably would have been raving about this draft instead of just being like, yeah, it was a good draft. So, and then the other thing, the biggest thing I think in terms of Andrew Berry and what he did and didn't do this offseason is probably focus more on offensive line help. I know they obviously signed Tevin Jenkins. They obviously signed Cornelius Lucas, but I think people really wanted him to target that left tackle spot and find somebody for the future. And there was value there. Like when they took Dillon Gabriel, there were still some guys on the board that I think could have made some sense on the offensive line at the tackle spot specifically, but they waited on that. So maybe that's like one strike against him this offseason that he didn't address that more in the draft. You could also argue they didn't address wide receiver enough. But again, limited resources to a degree. And I think as you look at like the sum of its parts and everything that kind of transpired this year, and I didn't even mention the Myles Garrett thing like Sam did, this offseason, I do think was a resounding win for the Browns and probably does deserve to be talked about as one of the more underrated off seasons of that teams might have had in the NFL. They accomplished a number of things, a number of priorities, addressed a number of positions with guys that I feel pretty comfortable saying are going to end up being hits. And like I said, that could be where Andrew Berry has his best draft here in Cleveland. And on top of that, you address your quarterback problem potentially with a guy who was clearly misdrafted in Shedeur Sanders and went way later than he should have. And you got great value on him where you're not paying him that much money. Like there was a lot of, small wins for Andrew Berry and the Browns over the last couple of months. And now we got to see what it sort of means on the field. But I agree with Sam Monson that it feels like the Browns had what should be called, in my estimation, an underrated offseason. You shouldn't be surprised by Obo Okoronkwo being released by the Browns this week. I'll explain. We'll talk about why it happened coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra and Cialis, maybe even tried them yourself. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiette Ready. Rougiette is the next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rougiette's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, an average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. If traditional options just have not worked, Rougiette might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to rougiette.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL for 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but not FDA approved, and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rougiette website for full safety information. So on Thursday, the Browns dropped the news that they were terminating the contract of Obo Okoronkwo. Also made it known that in the process, that was sort of the headline, if you will, of the move that they made. But they also signed Andre Schmidt, kicker, who spent some time in the Browns practice squad this past season, was an undrafted free agent with the Bears in 2023 and has kind of bounced around here as kind of this like role-playing kicker who's, been on practice squads, mostly, especially with the Browns. And so they're trying to add another body there for camp to add some competition, just have another kicker, all those things, while parting ways with Obo Okoronkwo. And I think the initial like sticker shock of, oh, why'd they get rid of Obo Okoronkwo probably was there for some. And I can understand that because it's a name that you could become familiar with the last couple of years, guy who was a rotational defensive end on this team. And frankly, I think a guy that fans kind of got to know a little bit and like a little bit. I know he was a great presence in the locker room. Guys really took to him. He was always very vibrant and happy and sort of fun loving in that group. So it's a little, I guess, shocking from that standpoint. But in the grand scheme of things, I think the writing was kind of on the wall for Obo Okoronkwo. When I talked about this, I believe it was last week when I was talking about the defensive line and how great that room could be and how deep I think that room is. And I sort of tried to flush out. I believe it was actually a Fan Friday question last week where somebody asked, like, what's the projection of the defensive line going to look like? How many guys do they keep there? And I tried to sort of squeeze Okoronkwo on the end there. But that's what this ultimately came down to. It was an addition by subtraction type thing where the Browns feel confident in the guys that they have, above Obo Okoronkwo right now, where they were like, this is the move that like, it makes sense that they sort of parted ways with him here because they have a surplus at that position in my estimation. And I honestly, I think that's really, I think it was less about Obo and more about like roles and just, it was a numbers game ultimately. And I can tell you right now, this team feels confident in guys like Alex Wright, trying to cement himself as an everyday or the starting, if you will, defensive end. They feel confident about a guy like Isaiah McGuire, who filling in after they traded Zadarius Smith. They feel confident in his ability to maybe take on that role and have a bigger role on this team. Like, so that's two young guys that you're trying to sort of bank on here. And that is the phase that the Browns are in, right? There's a number of areas you can look and say, hey, they're leaning into guys that they, recent third round, fourth round draft picks to see if they can sort of stick and provide some depth or confidence here. And so that's ultimately like what they're doing. What they're doing here with those two is they feel those two are ready to have more on their plate, if you will. And then also, and this is the biggest move that I think signaled months ago that Obo could be in trouble, which was the signing of Joe Tryon-Shoyinka this offseason, who I didn't mention, by the way, in talking about underrated offseason moves. I think that's another pretty solid one for the Browns. He's going to get a chance to just play defensive end with his hand in the dirt, not have to worry about doing the linebacker stuff like he was doing in Tampa. And for him, like, he's a very similar play to Obo. And he kind of, like, when he was signed, it was pretty evident that he was going to sort of be in that Obo role. And that made people wonder, like, what does that mean for Obo? Where does he fit? Is he on the outside looking in? And it came to fruition that that was the case. Once they signed Joe Tryon Shoyinka, there was conversations that, like, yeah, he's going to take Obo's role. So maybe they June 1st designate Obo and cut him because they save a decent amount of money. He will count, I think, 1.9 against the salary cap this year with his dead cap. And because he had some void year money that was attached to his deal from, kicking the can down the road, he'll count another $4 million against the cap next year. But there is some savings that come with it in the immediate future and in the short term. And we'll see what obviously next year looks like. But yeah, so they're able to clear a little bit of space and open up for those guys to sort of take the reins on that one of those rotational defensive end spots rather than Obo. And so it's not, again, all that surprising that this is how it came to fruition. The only reason they didn't June 1st designate him because they only get 2 in offseason, and their 2 this offseason ended up being Dalvin Tomlinson, who they moved on from, and obviously Juan Thorne, who everybody remembers they moved on from as well. So they could only do 2. They kept Obo around for now. He makes it through minicamp. I actually thought they would take it a little bit longer and keep him through training camp, but I was already going into training camp with the understanding that Obo might be the guy that gets, sort of pushed out here, just again by addition by subtraction by the numbers game that's being played, because it didn't seem like his role really had a guarantee at this point, especially when you got somebody in Joe Tryon Shoyinka to sort of do that exact same role and fill that void. And for what it's worth, by the way, Joe Tryon Shoyinka, I saw him a lot with the 2s during minicamp and OTAs, and he was really good. He showed really well. He was constantly in the backfield trying to make plays. Like, there was a lot to like about him fitting into the system and the aggressiveness that he brings to the table in Jim Schwartz's attacking scheme. I think he's going to have a chance to just like not think, but just play. And that's a pretty enticing thing. Like, he could have an impact, and it's understandable why with his presence, the Browns ultimately decided, yeah, we don't need Obo anymore. We can get away with this, and we feel confident in the group that we have. So it opens up the door for maybe somebody else to make this team instead. Maybe a Sam Kamara now sort of comes into play, where his versatility of being able to play interior or outside is something that benefits him to maybe sneak on this team, or he could be a practice squad guy too. We'll see ultimately how many guys they want to keep on the defensive line. I talked about it last week, but the last 2 years that roster cutdown day, they've kept 9, and then sometimes that's expanded to 10 in terms of all the defensive linemen across the board, from defensive end, interior to the other side. So we'll see what all that looks like. But I wouldn't say removing on from Obo Okoronkwo was all that big of a surprise, because I think the writing was on the wall for him just based off of how things transpired and played out this offseason. So in the grand scheme of things, yes, the sticker shock of seeing a guy that the Browns signed not so long ago being released is maybe there, but that's kind of been a trend for Andrew Berry for what it's worth too. There's been a number of occasions now. Dalvin Tomlinson, Juan Thornhill, Zadarius Smith. You go back even before Juan Thornhill to John Johnson III. Numerous occasions where guys that Andrew Berry signs in free agency to multi-year deals don't end up seeing the end of that deal. And so that's kind of an interesting trend that's now developed with Andrew Berry, where he, hands out these multi-year deals, but the assumption now kind of is becoming, well, it's not even a guarantee this guy's going to see the end of this thing, because it doesn't seem like these guys seem to last here in Cleveland on this roster, and they find mechanisms to move on from them earlier than the contract really expires. And Obo now is the latest example of that. So training camp will be here before we know it. We'll talk through all the details. Very limited number of practices open to fans. What does that mean for you? We'll talk about it coming up next here in the Locked On Browns podcast. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends and family? Maybe it's a game day and you suddenly realize that you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes into play. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, and merch, and even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it all possible, and one of their claims to fame is that ticket prices go down as you get closer to first pitch. Last year, I used Game Time for the first time when I brought tickets to see Ohio State, Michigan in the shoe. The results were obviously unfortunate, but my wife and I got to say we saw the eventual national champions in person, saw the game that sort of sparked that championship run, and it was all because of Game Time. On top of Game Time now becoming my new go-to app for buying tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So on Thursday, on top of the Obo Okoronkwo news, we also got the official training camp schedule for the Cleveland Browns. I've been waiting for it. You've been waiting for it. And we have a better understanding now of what training camp as a whole is going to look like for this team moving forward into the end of July. We're under a month away, which is, listen, I understood where I knew when it was going to be coming. You had a general sense when we got news that they were going to be reporting on that rookies are going to report the 18th, veterans are going to report the 22nd, that it was going to be around that time. But to now actually have like the dates in front of me, I get a little, I don't want to say like anxious, but I'm like, oh, I only got like a month left, less than a month to enjoy the summer and do some things that I want to do, like the vacation I'm taking next week. So going to make the most of that, of course. But we, yes, got the official training camp schedule. It all opens up on Wednesday, July 23rd. They will go 4 straight days, the 23rd, 24th, 25th, 26th, leading into that last weekend of the month. And that'll sort of pave the way for the next week. The team, Monday, July 28th, they're back at it again. And then the first preseason game obviously isn't until August 8th. So you get kind of 3 weeks of work in before that preseason game. What you really want to know, though, is, of course, the open practices to fans. And I have found it interesting that year over year, the number of those have decreased immensely. Obviously, no Greenbrier this year. So there was an opportunity with the team just kind of staying home for training camp to, maximize that by including the fans in as many of these as possible. But my understanding is that Kevin Stefanski likes having their privacy. He likes having practices where they can get a lot more done. They don't have to worry about showing certain things or, when they install things, it being put out there on social media or whatever, and fans seeing it or people showing up. I don't know how deep these these teams go to send people to other people's training camps and observe what they're doing, but I'm sure it probably happens. So he tries to keep a lot of that stuff as close to the vest as possible. And so because of that, there's only 8 practices that are open to you, the public, that you can come in and see this team. And it's, again, sort of a minimal number, which, again, with thinking that with the Browns being at home for training camp this year, I thought that the number would go up a little bit. But I believe last year they also only had 8 practices that were open to the public. So they've kept the number very, very, very minimal, very low. Not all that surprising for what I know about Kevin Stefanski and the Browns. And the biggest thing is, the other thing that I think is interesting about it is most of those practices that are open to the public, they come in the first 2 weeks of training camp. So even before that first preseason game on obviously August 8th, which is that Saturday game against that Friday game, against the Carolina Panthers. And so you're looking at, for open practices, Friday, July 25th, day 3 of camp, Saturday, July 26th, the very next day, that following Monday, the 28th, that Tuesday after, the 29th, and the Wednesday, July 30th. So over the course of the first week, you basically, and I know then you get Friday, August 1st as well. So over the course of the first week, you basically knock out 6 of the 8 practices that are open to the public. And then the last 2 come that Saturday after, the next Saturday, August 2nd, and then the Monday leading into the first preseason game against the Carolina Panthers, which will commence obviously on Friday. And part of that is, you're playing the Panthers on Friday. They're doing a joint practice with the Panthers, obviously, that Wednesday. So there won't be any more practices that week. They'll be leaving to go to Carolina to get ready for the game, do the joint practices, then play on Friday. But I don't know. In my mind, I thought there was a possibility that they'd come back from that game and you'd at least get maybe one more joint practice before that Eagles game. But they are doing the Eagles joint practices, so that sort of threw a wrench into things as well, where they're gone Wednesday the 13th and Thursday the 14th. leading up to the game against the Eagles on the 16th. So when you look at the schedule, it kind of makes sense that they knock them out early, but I just thought there'd be an opportunity later on in camp, even a couple weeks into the preseason, to allow fans to show up and be part of the training camp experience. Because I do know, like, there are fans who embrace this time of year because maybe you can't afford, tickets to a game for your family. And this is the easy way to get your family out there to sort of see your team and enjoy it and be able to, make the most of that experience and say you saw the Browns in person. But you basically go with August 4th being the last day that you can show up and be part of the public viewing of the Browns at training camp. You go over a month before you see the team again, because their first game is obviously September 7th. So that'll be the last opportunity to see them for a month until the season actually begins on September 7th, which I found sort of interesting. But I think as long as Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry are here, the number of it's more so Kevin Stefanski, but the number of practices that you as a fan are going to get to go to during training camp is going to be minimal, because that's just the way they like doing business. And so I'm sure people don't love that, but it's just kind of the nature of it right now. I do wonder, once this new practice facility is built, like, what that looks like, though. And if Kevin Stefanski's still here when that's all complete, like, which it's supposed to be, there's a lot of it supposed to get done within even just this first year, then, I wonder, like, what that looks like, because the idea here is that, like, they open up even more. There's even more opportunities for practice under the lights, for example, with that little stadium they're building and all those things. So we'll see. But I do think as long as Kevin Stefanski's here, that number is going to probably be on the lower end of things. And this year you only get the 8, which I know for some fans is obviously unfortunate, but we'll do our best. I'll do my best to keep you in the loop on the things that you don't get to see those weeks that follow, whether it's on social media at SpenCito_, obviously right here on this very podcast. Can't believe training camp is so close. It's right around the corner. Summer's already flying by. Another episode down with your dog pound. And I do want to remind you first of all, thank you for as always, for talking about your favorite football team with me and making us your first listen every day. I want to set this up for the next couple of weeks. I will be doing just Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes for the next 2 weeks. Those first 2 weeks of July, it's a short window. I'm traveling. I'm going on vacation, so I'm taking advantage of the fact that the network allows us to have, sort of weeks where these summer weeks where we don't have to do the full 5 days, because as I'm traveling and getting some time away, just makes it a little bit easier to knock out the 3. So just to be clear, I'm being transparent here. That'll be just for 2 weeks. So if you don't hear me on a Tuesday or Thursday, that's why. But you can count on those 3 dropping the next 2 weeks. And then July 14th, a couple weeks out from that training camp schedule really taking off, like I mentioned, we'll be back to 5 a week, and we'll already be counting you down to the regular season. We'll have a ton of stuff to talk, or to training camp, and we'll have a ton of stuff to talk about, because I'm ready to do position breakdowns, battles on this team that are going to sort of take place. I got some other fun stuff planned throughout the month of July and leading up to training camp, and then throughout training camp. So I please hit that subscribe button. Make sure Locked On Browns is your first listen every day. And for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL Scouting, or you can keep it local by checking out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, only 3 episodes next week, but we'll make them some good ones. I'll talk to you again soon. Have a great weekend, Cleveland. See ya.